And now, it's time for TJwow.
Hello everybody, welcome to our week of webinars. This is our last one this week. Can you believe the week has gone so quickly? I certainly can't. This is me, I am your host today. I'm the Deputy Editor of Training Journal, and with us today we have on the session Debbie Carter, who is our lovely editor, and we have also Mary, who is our lovely assistant editor, and we have lots going on in our back channel. Now the point of this session, the point of all of our sessions, is conversation. I love this quote from Jay Cross. It's the most powerful learning technology ever invented. And that's the whole point of the format of our sessions. Our speakers today, they haven't had to prepare slides, which secretly I think they've quite enjoyed. It's all about the conversation. You guys are driving this conversation. So please use that chat window. Please use the question pods, because it's all up to you guys. You're the ones that are going to get the learning out of the conversation as you want it. So you've got that chat window you can use with each other and with us as well. So please use that as much as you want to, and use that question and answer pod if you want to make sure we don't miss a question. And I'll definitely see them and do our best to answer all of those. If you've got a microphone and you think, I would like to say something, then you can use that raise hand icon, or just let us know in the chat window anytime you like. We definitely want your conversations and your questions if we can do. Also, we are on Twitter. We have our back channel going on, and you can continue the conversation there anytime you like. So please do join that if you want to, and you can tweet there. TJwow is sponsored by Give Back UK. Now, Give Back UK are creating some inspirational video learning library, and it's free to everyone within the UK third sector. And it's launching next month, so I'm really looking forward to seeing a little bit more about that. Now, all of our sessions are available on our Training Journal website, along with our next sessions, and I'll tell you about that at the end of today. So after today, this is our week of webinars launch. We're going to go into once a month and start going from there. So welcome to the session if you've just joined us. Kevin, you've just said a hi, everyone. Hi, Kevin. Lovely to have you here. Now, our topic today, all about assessment tools, has actually been decided by our Training Journal forum. Our forum is a great place you can go to and post messages, ask for advice, share ideas, help each other out. So I really recommend you go and have a look at that if you can. Now, less of all of that and more to the point. We have with us two people today who I think are going to make a really interesting conversation. We have Joe Keeler from Belbin, and we also have Lucy standing. I'm not going to say from, because you've got so many things that you do, Lucy. I think I would do you an injustice. So what I'm going to do, let me come into our main section and let me bring in our webcams here so that you can see that we've got Lucy, Joe and myself here, and they're waving hello. So let's just do a few short introductions and just kind of tell us a little bit about yourselves and what you do. Joe, let's start with you. So tell us what it is that you do, and tell us what Belbin do as well.
Okay, Belbin, it's a word most of you, I should imagine, have heard about. We've been around for about 30 years. And what we do is concentrate on helping people find their strengths and weaknesses when working in a team environment, in the workplace, and getting people to use those strengths and weaknesses, use a wonderful language to be able to work more effectively. We all feel passionate about it here. There's only 10 of us in the Belbin office. We're just down the road from Debbie Carter. We're in Cambridge, about 10 miles from Ely.
Fantastic.
And I think, Debbie, you might be getting this grey cloud very shortly, so sorry about your sunshine. And I've been with the company for 15 years and work very closely with everybody, including Dr. Meredith Belbin, who is still
fantastic.
At work.
Well, thank you very much for that, Joe. Really appreciate that. And I'm just going to paste some details for Joe into that chat window. Now, Lucy, tell us a little bit about what you do. And I know you do several different things. So just give us a highlight of some of those.
So I think
I'm
Clare College
primarily my background is I'm a psychologist, but the way in which I use most of my time at the moment is I'm running a couple of startups, but I also am now the vice chair of the Association for Business Psychology. And I think what the ABP tries to do is it's a fairly inclusive organisation. Really, anyone who's just interested in how psychology gets applied to work, we're interested in making sure that they understand best practice and that things are shared.
Fantastic, thank you. And I think we're going to have to talk more another day about your startups, because some of the things that you're doing and the ethos behind them I think are really interesting. We were chatting a little bit about that kind of off webcam and off recording a little bit earlier on, so some of that might come into our conversation today. Now, it's all about assessment tools, and I think this is a really interesting area. It's got some amazing press because of some of the things that you can achieve with it. It's also got some negative press because of things like lack of research and people misinterpreting some of that information. And there's a huge kind of span and spectrum there. I think they're really interesting because it applies insights. I remember doing the strength deployment inventory, or SDI, quite a few years ago, and since then I've questioned maybe the robustness of it, but on a personal note I found some really important insight into my own behaviour that actually made me think, you know what, I'm not evil, it's okay. I understand how I am, so I can build on that strength and deal with a perceived weakness, if you like. So let's start there with maybe just a couple of the positive things that we're seeing out of it, and we'll also, I think, have to deal with some of the challenges as well to have a really balanced conversation. So let me start with Lucy first of all. What are you seeing as some of the really positive things and uses of assessment tools?
I think the most positive thing I can say when assessment tools get used is when they're trying to assess more than just one or two things. I would say that humans are, relatively speaking, quite complex organisms. So using, for example, just an interview or just a personality questionnaire or anything like that is really quite limited in terms of what information you can find out about people. So I'd say positives are when we're starting to view a wider perspective and a broader perspective of approaches. So for example, whether it's a role play or whether it's a realistic job simulation, a personality questionnaire combined with an interview, I think that's when you're starting to see a much more robust picture getting formed. And I think that technology is enabling that to happen more effectively and more efficiently. So for example, I'm seeing the development of things like video interviewing, which I think is a great thing actually. The theory, there are some challenges at the moment, but long term I really see that as being something that will become huge. And I also think that mobile technology to do with things like ability tests and personality questionnaires mean that actually you're going to get more people able to complete these sorts of things.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lucy. I think that's a really nice, interesting kind of opening on that about bringing different things together. And Peter Davies in the chat window says, oh, I asked a question, have you had a good experience? And Peter says a number, but I absolutely agree with Lucy. You have to use a number of approaches and build an overall picture. I think that's a really key point. So Jo, obviously, you know, you find the assessment tools at Belbin really useful. Tell us a little bit about, because we talked a lot a couple of weeks ago about kind of people's strengths, and that's something that I really like about assessment tools, is you kind of think, well, how do we find our strength? That's so important. Tell us a little bit about how people use those kind of tools.
Completely. Yeah. I think people tend to default too quickly to just doing an interview. It's probably a method of assessment used for when they were approached.
Everybody's talking strengths.
It doesn't cost
nowadays.
anything,
It's quite
relatively speaking. You know, you sit in
area,
a room that you're
the Gallup
probably already in an
survey,
office sitting in, and you get to meet
the
someone,
SDI,
and it
there's
feels
so many out
like
there.
the right sort of an approach.
I would
because we
go
are
back one
more
step and
comfortable with having a
actually
conversation with
ask the
individuals.
question
And
of
whilst I wouldn't rule that out, and I would wholeheartedly
the
support
context
use
of the
an
strengths
interview,
you're trying to measure.
I do think
Are you
that
trying to
only
measure
using
the
an interview,
strengths
as Peter
of
has
somebody
also said,
within a
is
team?
it's flawed on so many levels, and we know
Are
that
you
it's flawed.
trying to measure the strength of somebody's personality, where they think their strengths are? Are you looking at their strengths when dealing with other people?
He said context is
So I
everything,
think
and Peter, you're absolutely
very
right.
much we should
And I think, you know, the way that
contextualise these,
people
because I
behave, you behave
agree
very differently on a
wholeheartedly with what
Friday night
Lucy
in the pub as you do on a
said,
Monday
is
morning in a
there
meeting
isn't
with a bunch of partners around the table. Your
one
behaviour is
stop,
entirely
you know,
dictated
for
by
all
the
of these
context
things.
in
You
which you
need to
find
be looking
yourself.
at a
So any
range of
form
tools,
of
but the question
assessment
to ask
that can
is,
indicate
what
and
is it I'm
assess
looking to
people
measure?
in
What
the
is it I'm
actual
looking
context in
to
which they'll be
achieve?
working is by far and
And how
away
do
going to be
we
your more
put this
effective form of assessment.
Thank you. Interesting
into
opening kind of comments
a
there,
business
because
scenario?
so
Because
much
we
of what
can
we've
measure the
talked
heck
about
out of
this week,
everything,
and I've been
but
to
it
a few
needs to
other
have some
events this week
relevance
around
to the
learning and development,
workplace
it always
and
goes
getting
back
something
to ask those questions at the beginning. Do
from it.
the
So strengths, I
respectful
think, are very
challenge. What are the
important,
outcomes? What do we need to achieve?
but why are
Look
you
at the
measuring the
context.
strengths?
Look
Because
at
that would
the
lead you to lots of
environment that
different
you're in.
tools.
And this is absolutely no
There
different. I think
isn't
that's a real
just the
key
one.
point that L&D
So I
should be
think
keeping in mind. So
we need
thank
to
you very much for
question
that in the first
things
instance.
right at the beginning
So we've got some
far
comments in
more,
the chat
perhaps,
window as well, which are
to
good.
understand why we're
Lisa
doing
says, I'm a
things.
big fan of the disc colours. I use
I don't know if
Belbin
you'd
as
agree
well,
with
but find it a bit
it.
more difficult to grasp and remember. And I think it's interesting how our individual responses to different tools can be different, and how they're used. I remember, you know, I don't remember much about Belbin. I've looked at it in the past, but I don't remember much of it now. But MBTI, for instance, myself, I just do not understand. It's like another language to me. So everybody will have those kind of different things. Kevin says, I've used Hydra, which is an immersive learning environment for not quite so formal assessment. Really powerful as it simulates real life scenarios. I've not heard of that one, Kevin, so I'm going to have to look that one up. Thank you. And I think that goes back to, you know, we're talking about assessment tools. Oh, you haven't either, Lucy. We're talking about assessment tools for all sorts of different reasons, but also this comes back to learning about ourselves, learning about our teams, learning about our business. So that's a really good point about scenarios. Thank you. And Peter says, let's not forget the value of simple 360-degree feedback to validate what these types of tools are telling us. Love that. So Joe, you've just kind of done a noise. What are your thoughts on that comment?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Lucy, any comment on this before I move on with a question from the question pod?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, everything is. I think self-report is actually a very useful measure, and there is, generally speaking, you know, there is very high reliability around someone self-assessing their own level of intelligence and their actual level of intelligence, if you agree with ability tests as being a good measure of intelligence. So self-report can actually tell quite a lot. However, it's not 100% brilliant, and it can only ever really be validated by the views of other people that you're working with. I might think I'm absolutely amazing, but actually everyone else might really hate me. I think I'm frankly unemployable.
I think I've got pretty much the same problem, Lucy.
Yeah, I run a couple of social startups because nobody else.
But it doesn't that go back to the point of knowing your strengths and your context? You're creating a context in which you thrive and survive. So that's absolutely brilliant. Thank you. So
yes, thank you for that positive twist on my unemployability.
Well, I do like a positive twist, it must be said. Debbie's just put in the chat window, oh, I don't know, Joe, TJ hired you. That's a good point, Debbie, actually. I must remember that. Thank you, Debbie, who's my editor at Training Journal.
So
let's get back to our chat pod. Our question pod. Now, Peter Davis,
people,
apologies,
not necessarily with interview, but even with interview, you can put your best suit
kind of pronounce these things
and
differently.
you can come across
Peter asks, going back to context, it would be
across.
great to hear experience of running effective business
the same with any of
simulation
the
in assessments.
tools that you can
Any great
use.
examples?
If you're just
Lucy, do you want to jump in on that one?
It depends on your self-awareness, your self-insight.
Yeah, I mean, I'll kick off on that one. I remember I used to run graduate recruitment for JP Morgan, although I'm so old, at the time it was Chase Manhattan.
But if you want to have a really good idea
and
of
I
how
remember
you are
coming into
behaving
an
in the
organisation
workplace,
that was
people that
basically
you work
16 rounds
with.
of interviews was pretty
It's
much all they did.
really simple and it's so
And I
effective.
started off with the traders, and what we
We
did was
should
we
never
developed
just
a computer-based
rely on
simulator to select
self-insight
traders
on
using. They were basically trading dilithium crystals because the coder who was doing
any
it
of these
really
things.
liked Star Trek.
I mean, at Belbin we've been using
But the sort of
360 back to 30
competencies or
years.
strengths,
It's
if you like,
always
that we
been
were
an
looking
integral
for were things like, could they remember
part of Belbin.
different bits of information that may have
you
been
are not
presented at the same time.
I think when it comes to personality
You're actually
tools, when you're looking at
presenting
things like
things
16
every
PF
5
or
minutes, like what sort of news stories may have had an
MBTI,
impact
because nobody
on
knows you,
the
what's in
movement
you,
of the
better than
dilithium
you.
crystals.
But when
And
you're
then what we
talking
did
about
after
how
that
does that
was that you then
manifest
use
and
an
what do
interview.
people
So you're
interact
saying
with
things like, well,
in the
what made you sell at that
workplace?
time? What made
course
you
you need to
buy?
ask
What
for
affected
feedback.
your decision? And so you're actually using a
It's
real-life simulation
imperative, yeah.
to
So yeah,
also
great
give, frankly, the
comments there.
candidate a much better experience of what the real-life job's going to be about. But then you're actually, when you're asking questions in an interview, it can be based on a real-life contextualized experience so that the data you're getting is much richer. It's not data like, I would do this if given half a chance. It is, when I was in that situation, this is what I did and this is why I did it. So you get more meaningful insight into behavior that is much more relevant to the context in which you're recruiting for. And I think the more that you can get assessments to reflect that sort of an interaction, the better it will be.
Thank you, Lucy. I really like how detailed that was about the kind of like was it lithium ion crystals that you talked about there?
If you like Star Trek, you probably know something more about that than I do.
Okay, I'm not going to comment on Star Trek. It's too incendiary, I think. So that's a really good point, and I just wanted to share. Kevin says, "Live long and prosper." Can I do that? Yeah, I can do that bit. Now, in the chat window, I've just shared a link to Kathy Moore's blog. I shared this earlier on in the week as well. She writes really good stuff about scenarios, so not necessarily specifically for assessment. It's about learning as well. But if you've not come across it before, some really, really good stuff from Kathy Moore and other stuff on her website too. So, and Peter's just shared, it's the basis of warp travel. Oh, okay, thank you very much. So I've got a really great question that's come through from Lisa. So Joe, I'm going to come to you on this question. Lisa asks, do you know if there's a difference between disc colours and insights, as Kevin mentions that in the chat, I thought they were one and the same. So Jo, do you have any insight on that? Brilliant, thank you. Now we've sadly lost you on webcam there, Jo. If you want to try it and start it again, you're more than welcome to. But I have put your picture in the meantime. I'm just switching around the screen so it actually looks like you're looking at us, which would be quite nice. But don't worry about it. These things happen. It's nice. And there you are. You're back again. Yeah, but it's not working. It's not showing you live. It's showing a lovely still image of you. So I'm just going to turn that off, and I'm going to leave your picture there. So these things happen. It's no big deal. But thank you for differentiating between the difference there. Lucy, any comments on that before we move on?
I'm afraid I don't know enough about the specific different tools. No, nothing to add further.
Okay. Brilliant, thank you, Jo. And Kevin has put in the chat window, yes, Insights is Young, Disk is Marston. And Lisa says, yeah, and the reports look exactly the same, which doesn't really help there, does it? So, Jo, thank you very much for trying with your webcam there. It's really not working other than a still image. If you want to get it working, you could log out and log back in again if you want to, or we'll to carry on the conversation. But if not, we've got your picture. Don't worry. Oh, well, you look very wistful and thoughtful, so that's okay.
Very wistful. You're thinking, wondering something there.
And in the chat window, Kevin has said, I'm a qualified insights facilitator, and I admit that the sheer number of tools is crazy. And I think that's one of the challenges, isn't it? So on that kind of particular tool, Frank Halberg asks a great question, which is, how can you find out what values a person has? And thank you in advance. So Lucy, what are your thoughts on that? How can you find out what values a person has?
I would start off by saying I agree entirely that I think values is a very important area to try and get some sort of an assessment on. So the fact you're asking the question, Frank, I think is brilliant. And I think the way that I would find it out would be a combined approach between an interview and a personality tool of some description. There will be some tools that are focused more on specific values that you may have in mind. So, for example, there's a number of tools out there that look specifically at things like integrity. But I guess down to the role and what you're looking for, it might then be more appropriate to sort of check out which sort of tools will help you get there. But by far and away, digging down with an interview is, in that instance, probably something I would recommend.
Thank you. Jo, what are your thoughts on that one? How do you find out what values a person has? Thank you very much, and Frank has said thank you there as well in
they are different
in the question pod. So Debbie says, let me, and thank you again, Frank, that's our pleasure. Debbie asks a question. So if you are a new learning and development person, what tools would you recommend them to find out about? Are there any that
no, Insight,
are
I believe,
general
is
use,
based on
say, for
so
personal
it's
development? So that's a
going
really
back
good question.
to,
So I'm new to learning and development. What tools can I go out and have a look at,
DISC, I
especially
believe,
for
is
personal
based
development?
on
Lucy, let's start with you on
Marsden, something slightly different. So they, each of them lead
So, I mean, I
to,
would say
after
my
completing
knowledge
a
of all of the
questionnaire,
different tools out
looking at
there is
yourself,
too
they
limited to
do,
give a fully a
they
comprehensive
give you an
answer to
idea
this one.
of your personality preferences.
I mean, I would probably say do a couple of different things. I would do an ability test and find out how you're likely to score on things like verbal and numerical reasoning, just simply because those are the sorts of things a lot of employers tend to use. And then I would probably also do, I mean, to be honest, it's quite, you know, you can get quite expensive because they're all going to cost you money. I tell you what I would probably stay away from though, and that's the MBTI. Shock horror. Nobody sue me.
So why stay away from that though, Lucy? And your webcam's not working either. I just brought a picture in, so apologies guys. You'll have to have me live until mine stops working. Lucy, why stay away from MBTI? What's the logic behind that thought?
I think it really does show that there are so many tools out there, and they all have slight variance in them, be it variance of the way that they measure or variance in the output.
It's going to work.
It's a good idea to get, you know, do a lot of research before you choose which tool that you want. There's so much out there.
You want it to have effectively the same result. You want it to be able to kind of understand that it's going to work the right way. And MBTI, people who do it tend to, the results don't tend to be as reliable as they should be for something that, you know, gives you a better insight into yourself as a person.
Okay, that's interesting. And Kevin in the chat window is saying, I agree. As an entry point, MBTI is too overwhelming and many find it difficult to access. I find that quite interesting. I've never facilitated MBTI. I've definitely gone through and had the personality assessment and had the discussion. And I tend to agree, it was overwhelming even for somebody who is interested in the topic generally. I just found it was far too much, whereas things like SDI, DISC, Belbin, probably a few others that I've forgotten now as well, they would just seem so much more accessible. So I think that's a really good one.
There's some very good, Chris, if someone is interested in it, there's some very good articles in the Harvard Business Review about why the MBTI is not a particularly brilliant measure of personality. And yes, Tom, it is the Myers-Briggs.
Of course, of course.
Yes.
That's an interesting one. We have an internal, well, not internal, questionnaire that Meredith developed back in the 1960s and 70s, which is called the Personal Preference Questionnaire, which is purely to find out people's values. How do they see the world? What motivates them? And we use it internally, but my goodness, it's a heck of a lot of marketing.
And I would agree.
I think there are tools out there, but I'm not entirely sure how many.
Webinar today
you may find
personality is not relevant in the context of assessment. They are 100% wrong. Personality is relevant. So it's incredibly tempting to sort of think, right, well, I'll go to a tool and I'll use that. Fantastic. It's somebody else who's doing, it's a nice way to gauge the relative preferences of people doing it. But just because it's easy to administer and just because it's easy to read a report doesn't mean it's easy to interpret or think about the context in which you'll be applying that. and it's just a bit too tempting to use it in that way.
So what I'm hearing you say, Lucy, is that people might go and get a report, so they might have, as Joe says, Googled something free, got something out of date, maybe incorrect, gone and used that, and almost done that as a very kind of short, sharp thing, and oh, your personality type X, which means ABC, and that's it, done and dusted. You're now labelled, and there hasn't been a proper debrief, there hasn't been a proper discussion about that, and then the context of where people work. Am I understanding you right there, Lucy?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the thing about personality tools generally is that, you know, you're getting an individual's take on what they prefer or not, you know, or what they don't prefer. You're not really getting any indication as to their actual ability. Right? I might hate attention to detail. Maybe that's not something I consider to be my strength. However, in reality, I am ridiculously anal about that sort of thing. So if I read an email and somebody has put an apostrophe in the wrong place, or if they spelled a word incorrectly, yeah, that really irritates me. And I can't even send a text message without writing things out properly, and I put paragraphs in. I mean, it's ridiculous. So I would say that it's something I hate. Therefore, on a personality measure, I would score very low on something like that, but yet it is no reflection on my ability to actually be good at that thing. And so that's often where the confusion may come in. I think there's also a general issue around the fact that maybe I'm just the sort of person that scores quite low on things, or I tend to avoid the extremes. So on a scale of 1 to 10, I may say, yes, I love ice cream. I'm going to give that a 7 out of 10 because that's as far as I'll ever go. That somebody else may use the 10 out of 10 all the time. So if you were to compare one against the other, one may come out as being much stronger at being able to do something, but me, who likes ice cream just as much, if not more, I've self-assessed myself differently because of a personality trait within me to do that.
Wow, Joe, you're readily agreeing in the background there, I can hear.
I'm not too.
Yeah. Can I interrupt here, or can I join in? Can I? I think with all of these tools, it depends on how well trained the person is to use them. So if you were to type free MBTI or free Myers-Briggs into Google, you would get a whole range of different companies giving it to you free and everything. And you know, that wouldn't, you know, they're not well researched, they're not, you know, they don't have anything to them. Whereas if you've spent the time and resources to go on all these training courses to understand how to use a tool properly, then you may get different results. Yeah. We find
brilliant. Thank you very much for that comment, Joe and Lucy. There's some interesting stuff going on in the chat window. I shared a link to some curated resources that were just kind of questioning the lack of scientific evidence behind learning styles, MBTI, NLP, and so on. And that's a real move forward, I think, in a lot of industries, but L&D is no different in actually saying, well, we need empirical evidence, we need something to prove that we're doing the right thing. And Gershit has said, interesting, if you go on the MBTI facilitator training, they bang on about the reliability. But I guess they would. And it's always that challenge. That's why we need to research things. We need to have that information so that we can make that informed decision. Kevin is saying the tools are a great starting point. It's the follow-up discussion and ongoing support, exactly as we've been talking about. And I really like the point that Peter's making, which is going to lead me into a question in the question pod. Peter says, people can get put into boxes. Tom Peters said that the map is not the territory. A type is not a description of you, it's a representation. It needs validating. And as Joe was saying, it's separating out the personality from the behaviour. And Peter says the other side of this is that people start to use types as excuses. Oh, I'm a P. So expect to get all that stuff last minute and start kind of acting to type, if you like. So this leads me to a really interesting question in the question pod from Tom Norman. So Tom, thank you for this. Tom says, so if you've used one of these assessments, how can you make sure that you haven't unfairly pigeonholed people? So let's come to you first on this, Jo. How can you make sure you haven't unfairly pigeonholed someone? Mm.
Yeah. Mm. Mm. Yes, I'm having to speak as opposed to nod because obviously you can't see me. I couldn't agree more. There is a
Interesting
big
points there, Jo.
difference
Thank you.
between who I
I
am
really
and
appreciate
what do
that.
I do
And in the
how
chat
that comes
window,
across.
we've got kind
And
of a
it's going
conversation
back to the
going
question,
on
what is it that
where
you want to
Tom
measure? If
says,
you
I
want to
think
measure
some people want
personality,
a
which for
label.
coaching
It
and
makes them
various other
feel
things
more
is
comfortable.
invaluable,
And
make sure
Peter's
you've
saying
got
good
a
point, and
robust
Frank's
tool
asking for
to
an
use
elaboration on
personality.
that.
The 16
And I think if I
PS
go
and
back to the
another
experience I
15
had just
FT
through
or
a corporate
something is
course,
a
SDI, the strength
great
deployment
tool to be
inventory,
able
happened to
to
be the thing that somebody
assess
used at the
somebody's
time. I
personality.
really
It's quite
liked the
it's very
label that I
robust,
came
and
out. I'm
Patel did a lot of
in
work on that.
conflict to use the language they use.
So
I was a green person. And like
MBTI
you
is
say,
okay
Jo,
to a
it's just
point,
like, well, I
but it
could have
doesn't go
just
into
carried
the
on using
depth
that
that
language
the
and kind of going, oh,
16PS
I'm
does.
green. But that
So there's
doesn't
some
mean a whole lot
really
when you
good
get back to the
tools there,
business
but
when
like
people
you
don't know
need to
what that
use
is.
it with other
And
things
what I
to
found
find
really
out how
useful
does
about
that
that
actually
is that label
manifest
helped me
itself.
understand when I was
How does
in
it? What do I
conflict, when something
actually
happened
do?
where I
What
was
are the
challenged and
behaviours?
I behaved a
And then
particular
to work
way
out whether or not Lucy's
that I
love of ice
thought was
cream is seen by
negative,
everybody
that's how I'd
else.
interpreted
Ask other
it,
people's
it
feedback.
allowed me that understanding of why I did it and therefore how to manage it a little bit later on. And whilst I haven't had a follow-up in terms of a course or a what's the word I'm looking for, conversation with anybody, with my own self-awareness and thoughts about it, I've managed to kind of go along and go, right, okay, I'm allowed that initial reaction, but now let's have the measured response and change my behaviour around that. So I think those things are really interesting. And Tom says, I think people want a reason for why they see the world or behave as they do. Maybe someone is struggling with something and can't understand why it's the case. If you're given a label, it allows you to understand why you are struggling. So I think that's a really interesting point. Lucy, what are your thoughts on this one?
So just to bottom out this, how do you stop being pigeonholed? I would say is really just not to use just that one tool. So if the tool, for example, says you are an extrovert, then if you were, for example, to use an interview, you might ask questions like, can you give an example of where you have behaved in a reflective, calm, quiet manner? Or, where you're basically seeking evidence that stops the person that you are talking to from being pigeonholed. Because chances are the way in which someone will come out on a personality profile doesn't necessarily mean that they can't do all of the other things that you may be seeking for in a job, which is why doing a more thorough appraisal of what it is that they're good at, but specifically asking questions around, displaying those behaviours in the right sorts of contexts will mean that you're getting a much better overall picture.
Great, thank you very much. And yeah, I was talking about SDI. Kerry had asked about that in the chat window. And Joe, you said SDI is a useful tool in properly trained.
The first step would be make sure that whatever assessment that you use, you're using the most correct
Kevin
and
says in the chat window, I think there's a danger of mixing personality and behaviours. Yeah, it's the difference between who I am and what I do.
Are very good.
Like I was saying, that insight that I got of who I am made it just, this is who you are. It's not negative, it's just you.
Across.
But the behaviour bit was me deciding,
well,
am I going to behave
say, oh, I'm
in
yellow,
a negative way,
green, and you think,
or
well,
am I going to behave in a more measured way? Now
and
I have
they say
that
it means
insight,
that I'm a yellow, I'm a blue, I'm a green.
And that's how powerful these tools can be, I think.
People haven't understood.
I've got another great question from the question
pod.
pod.
Context all of the
Derja
time.
asks,
People
any
feel they're
tips
pigeonholed
on how
if they've
to
been on a
actually
course
influence
and they've been told they're
individuals or
something,
teams
and
to actually use the new learnings
people
and
don't
flex
feel
their
they've been
thinking and
pigeonholed.
behaviour. So I don't know if it's the same answer really as what we've just talked about, or whether you have different insights, Joe and Lucy.
And
so
the
tips
relevance
on
of it when working with
influencing
others
individuals
and
and
working in the
teams
organisation.
to use the new
And
learnings and flex their
having
thinking and
that
behaviour.
label,
Lucy,
people
let's
just
start
use
with
the
you.
language, but they're using it far more appropriately and not just to describe themselves.
A
lot of the time people use it to
myself,
describe
I
the
like
type
to
of
come
work.
from an evidence-based approach.
It could be
so
this work
I
requires
wouldn't
a
really try and influence anyone to use anything unless I can be sure that the evidence seems to indicate
who's
that,
able to do
yes,
it. Nobody,
we can
okay,
predict
who's
a cause
prepared to
and
make that
effect outcome
sacrifice.
from this. So
using
my
these
first
tools, I often
tip
feel,
would be
is the
don't try and
key
influence
to not
anything, to
pigeonholing.
adopt
If
or
you just
use
do it in
something
a 3-hour
for which there
session
is
or
no
with a
indicated
one-to-one that
evidence
lasts
to
for
show that it
half a
has
day
improved
and never ever use it
outcome in
again,
terms of performance.
that's where the
NLP
pigeonholing really
being
does,
a good example of
you know,
that.
does happen. So it's using it,
Resilience
I
training,
believe,
there's an
is
article
the
that's just
thing
come
that
out
will
as well
stop
in
that
the
from
Tube
happening.
journal, latest journal. So there's a lot of hype and there's a lot of usage of things without any actual evidence to show that it does have a demonstrable impact on performance. So I think that's probably my starting point. If you have got that evidence, then I think the job of influencing is really quite simple. Because if the evidence is there, anyone else can look at it, interrogate it, and interpret it themselves and come out with the same outcome.
Okay, thank you, Lucy. And an interesting comment in the chat window, Tom Norman says, it also externalizes your personality traits, which could be a good or bad thing. You could say, right, I'm going to try and change things I don't like. Or you could say, well, that's just me. I can't do anything about it, and it's not my fault. So I think that's really part of that kind of managing the conversation and managing the impact. Joe, what are your thoughts on this? I find that really fascinating, Jo, and especially, you know, I completely with you and agree with what you're saying.
Yes.
My understanding of your area, Belbin, is that it's about team roles. So it's about the makeup of your team and how you work together. So surely within that, and then this would kind of apply to a lot of different tools, there's an inherent need to share something with the team. Brilliant. Thank you for clarifying that, Jo. That was really interesting. And in the chat window, Jackie Campbell has said, conversations with someone with a growth mindset differ greatly from those conversations with a fixed mindset. I think that understanding where someone is in their thinking and beliefs, helping raise awareness can be quite empowering for people, as it's all a matter of a perspective. And just like a lot of these tools, they're a snapshot in time, aren't they? So I'm going to continue with the rest of the chat. There's another interesting point I want to come back to in a moment. But Lucy, just talk to us a little bit about, are these tools a snapshot in time, or are they kind of, I don't want to say pigeonholing, are they telling us something that's about us fundamentally for the rest of our life?
Yeah, so I've actually just replied to that chat room.
Sorry, I didn't see that
comment. Because, no, that's fine. Because personality as a construct is pretty stable. So, you know, you will see a 2-year-old, you know, maybe sort of screaming and throwing their toys out the pram, and they may be an impatient type with the other 2-year-olds looking bewilderingly at them. Chances are that person as an adult will still be fairly impatient. They just may have learned to control their behavior. So personality, if you're born an extrovert, you will be an extrovert all of your life. You may behave with introvert tendencies in the appropriate
circumstances. I agree very much.
Personality doesn't tend to change.
I also think
what
it's
does change are things like your values, your circumstances, your context. So as a 21-year-old, it may be that you're more driven by money, for example, because you have to go out there and earn a wage, and you've got to start getting yourself on a property ladder.
And it
By the time you're
with
50,
and if they
maybe your
understand
drive
why
to
they're using
acquire
a new tool
is
or
actually
whatever,
a lot
they will
lower. So
continue
your
to do it.
values
If they
and what you want to
understand
get out of a
the
job are
language,
very
etc.
different.
So it's how engaged they are usually in a session.
Thank you very much. And Kevin makes a good point in the chat window. I also wouldn't confuse being an extrovert or introvert with how much extroversion or introversion I use. I think that's a good point about those differences that you can see and how those things change over time. So thank you for that, Lucy.
But also,
now further back in the chat window, Kevin Smith had said, a healthy, high-performing team is one that has reached a point where they can safely share the results of these tools and challenge and support each other. I really like that point, Kevin. And I worked in a team a few years ago where I'm not quite sure how performing we were, it must be said, but what we did share, as I say, we'd gone on and done this SDI. I think actually the team had done the SDI inventory before I'd joined them, but I'd done SDI in a previous role. And actually they had little cards up and there's a triangle in colours, and that's how the SDI thing works. It's different from everything else. And they actually had these up on their desk cubicles, so that if you understood that and you'd been through that process, you could see, right, they're red, or they've got a high this or that, or whatever it might be for your tool, and you could understand them a little bit
sort of language that we want to use
better, and the team actually openly shared that and could then work with those strengths, which I found really
outcomes
important.
of assessments if they
now
don't
we've got
feel
an interesting question
personal,
on the introvert-extrovert
it allows us to talk about
here
things
in
that we
the
do,
chat pod,
not
in
who
the
we
question
are. People
pod.
feel less afraid of
Frank
that.
Halberg says,
And
if you
more
wanted to create
likely
a
to
work
adopt it
or
going
learning
forward,
environments that help
with
people
behaviour
who are
you
more
can change, you can determine
introverted
what
than
behaviours people
extroverted
see and what they
to
interact
thrive,
with.
feel
It's not
well,
quite
work
so
well,
certain.
learn well, what would you do? So let's go to Jo on this one first. If you wanted to create a work or learning environment to help introverted people feel, work and learn well, what would you do? I don't know if that's a humongous question or not, Jo.
And now we
Oh, absolutely. And you need a language to be able to, so for example, if we look at Belbin in particular, my top 3 preferred behaviours are coordinator, resource investigator and shaper. And my least preferred is completer, finisher and specialist. And it's really important that the team know that, understand that, know how to use that information. And we need to know where the gaps are and where the overlaps are in the team. But we're using a language which is describing the way that I behave. It's not a language that is describing who fundamentally I am, because I don't know how willing people are to share that.
And that's a great comment, Jo, because you know all the
so
topics we've had this week, and probably all the questions that we've had this week, could be a whole hour or day on their own. And we're just having a rounded conversation. So thank you, Lucy. Any insights on this about kind of introverts and making them feel, work and learn comfortably?
No, this one I think we're starting to pigeonhole and label people a bit, and I don't think that there's anything that you can do for introverts you shouldn't be doing for extroverts. You know, creating a supportive environment, I think, is something that, you know, should be an aspiration for all personality types.
I'll do that unmute button then. Oh, do you see? The whole week I've managed not to do that. There you go. It's not a bad thing to keep it muted sometimes. What I was saying was, thank you very much. And there's a great conversation going on in the chat window around kind of environment and culture and trying to make that a kind of a really appropriate place. So thank you for that. And Jackie's got an interesting question in the question pod. Does anyone have tools they've found very helpful to use with teams? I've recently been looking at EBW, which is emotions and behaviour in the workplace, and it seems good, but I don't have any experience with this. So guys, in the chat window, have you had any experience with EBW, emotions and behaviour in the workplace? Or perhaps any other team stuff? Now, I know obviously, Jo, you know, your Belbin team roles, so it's a fairly obvious one that you're going to say here would be good. But what do you think you have to look at in terms of working with teams? What do you have to look at when deciding which tool to use? What would you have to focus on or be aware of?
Yes.
Thank you, Jo. Lucy, yeah. Anything to add on that?
No, not really. I mean, I think just, I guess, sort of signposting really. There is something called the Psychological Testing Centre, and I have to be honest, I don't use it myself very often because I'm not in a position now where I'm recruiting and developing assessment processes. But the Psychological Testing Centre, PTC, does publish all of the research, if you like, behind a particular product or tool. So, for example, if you want to work out how reliable a product is, i.e. how consistent it is, there will be the reliability statistics data in there. Likewise, if there is any predictive validity information that will also be published. So in terms of specific tools, that's probably quite a good resource to look for. It doesn't cost anything to log in, and anyone who's getting
a
their tool,
very large question. There's been a fair amount in the press recently about creating environments which will allow introverts to shine. I'd always ask what type of introversion that they are showing,
I guess a gold
because obviously it manifests itself in many different ways.
About 0.8.
It could be that people just need more time to reflect before engaging. It could be that you need to allow somebody to do their own research before coming back.
Personality tool to be
it could mean that you need somebody to be able to sit
that
quietly and
ruler is always going to tell you want to have some
work problems out for themselves before they interact with others.
Bottle or an iPad or a diary. If
it depends. It can be. It's a massive subject, Joe. I'm going to stop there.
The more consistently it will produce the same results for that particular individual. The closer that gets to one perfect correlation, you're basically saying that's the equivalent of a ruler. Something that it may not be perfect all of the time. Maybe you drop a couple of scales, but pretty much you're there, and it's saying the same thing about you as it did 5 years ago. Then that's where you're getting about 0.8.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Anything to add on that, Joe, before I move on?
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. And I think the fact that you share it online and it's downloadable, screens, volumes as well, it's the organisations that don't share and won't let you access that data should give you big alarm bells.
And definitely agree with that on all sorts of different topics and levels and industries. I see that, and he's just like, well, if you're not going to share that and be open about it, how much can I trust you? So can we just touch in? We're on our last kind of minute or so of conversation, but Joe, you said a really interesting point that probably we should have just talked about at the beginning even, but you made the point between a psychometric tool and a behaviour tool. Now we've talked about behaviour and personality in the session today. Can you just clarify what's a psychometric tool, Joe?
The key thing is, if you're working with teams, is that you need a tool which has researched itself looking at the effectiveness of teams. There's not that many of them around, and you can try and shoehorn a lot of these tools and use it with teams, but there isn't necessarily the research done on what is making a team effective.
Thank you very much. Lucy, anything to add?
A lot of people make a lot of assumptions. There's a lot of tools out there that say let's use this for teams, but actually their personality and the research isn't there. The key thing would be look at what research has been done, and I feel quite passionate about this because it seems to be a bandwagon that people can jump on like a lot of these things. But there are tools out there that have done years and years and years of research.
It's getting a bit too technical, but it's how those
the right tools that are needed for this. So do the research first, just because something's new doesn't mean that the research
structural equational modelling and all that sort of stuff that goes on in the background to kind of spit out the report, that the use of those sorts of statistics is what makes a product a psychometric. So it's not just personality, but you will also find things like the verbal reasonings, the numerical reasoning being referred to as psychometric, but I guess down the branch of them being ability-based.
Brilliant. Thank you for clarifying that. And I always hate those ones on maths. I'm no good at those, but thank you very much for those. Okay, and Kevin's just said in the chat window, I think it also explains why a lot of managers get confused as they hit with psychometric frameworks, behaviour frameworks, competency frameworks. lots to get their head round. Absolutely. And you know what? We don't have any more time to get our head round it. We are at time. I cannot believe how quickly this has gone and how quickly this week has gone, quite frankly. So Jo and Lucy, absolutely stunning conversation, really insightful. I've been really looking forward to this conversation because I think we all have so many kind of opinions maybe and experiences of psychometric tools. So thank you very much, guys. And also thank you in the chat window and for your questions, everybody. You've done absolutely stunning keeping this going. Now there's some links at the bottom there that will tell you a little bit more about Jo and Lucy if you want to go and have a look at those. Also, thank you very much to our sponsors, Give Back UK, and you can go and find a little bit more about them. There's a link there in the box at the bottom. All of our sessions, all of our webinars this week and in the future will be on the Training Journal website, and the link is in that box there. You can go and have a look at those and our upcoming ones. You can join us on Twitter if you want to with #TJwow. Also, what you can do is join us on the forum, and again, the link's in there. So let's continue this conversation. Let's continue this learning because we've got so much richness and insight. It's been absolutely brilliant this week. Now, our next session, there's no more week of webinars. We're not doing another week next week. I'm not quite sure I could cope with it. And my coffee intake has definitely gone up. But what we're doing on June 21st, we have a webinar where the topic has changed. Now, that's quite an open topic. At the moment, we have Paul Matthews who is coming along, and we will get some other people too. So watch this space on the website. Guys, thank you so much for your time today. Really looking forward to seeing you again in the future. And
because we're not psychometric, we're a behavioural tool.